Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Kyle's marriage proposal for Claire wiggles out of Audra blow-up. Kyle Abbott will plan a marriage proposal to save his romance with Claire Newman after a major Audra Charles blow-up. At Society, Jack Abbott will push Victor Newman to tear up the $5 million contract Kyle signed if he's truly backing off Kyle and Claire's relationship. However, Victor will refuse to destroy a perfectly good contract and will end up having one of his typical confrontations with Jack. After that, Diane Abbott will talk to Jack and find out that he wants to give Victor a dose of his own medicine. However, she will be concerned that he might make things worse by attacking Victor. There'll be some talk about Kane Ashby as well, but Jack won't really be concerned about him. Outside on Thursday's Y&R episode, Victor will text Kane to ask if he's ready to move forward with their alliance against Jabbo. Victoria Newman, played by Amelia Heinle, will discuss her life without Cole Howard with Nikki Newman, played by Melody Thomas Scott, at the coffee house. Eddie Peck, and her worries about Claire needing to grieve. Nikki will reveal her plan to make Claire a junior executive in a specific division and call it the next rung on the corporate ladder because she thinks a promotion might help Claire right now. Claire will update Kyle at the Abbott mansion about how she told Nate Hastings about Audra's actions in front of Audra, who denied everything. In the end, Claire will demand to know what Kyle hasn't told her about Nice and won't let him continue to dodge the question. Kyle will think back on Diane and Jack urging him to come clean, so he'll admit he allowed for a kiss with Audra in France. Claire will believe there was more after Kyle says he was disgusted the whole time. Kyle will hint about having to go with it for a bit to sell the trap, but he'll assure Claire that Audra means nothing to him. Despite this, Claire will be upset that he lied to her because he previously claimed that nothing happened. Claire will rant about how Audra was more truthful than Kyle was, and she will wonder if he would have ever told the truth without her prompting him. Kyle will beg Claire to tell him that he didn't make things worse and will be desperate to get this fixed. Since she won't be able to make Kyle feel better right now, Claire won't believe she can say that and will leave him. Once Claire joins Victoria and Nikki at the coffee house, she'll admit Kyle just confessed to kissing Audra in Nice. Claire will talk about their conversation and how Jordan raised her and how Kyle's lies made her feel. Even though Nikki will acknowledge that Kyle made a mistake, she will still believe that he really does love Claire. However, Claire will not yet be able to forgive Kyle and will require time to process everything. Nikki will eventually meet Victor at the ranch, where she will ask him about his reasons for treating Kyle that way. Victor will acknowledge that their rivalry will never go away because Nikki will believe that the conflict was always more about Victor's beef with Jack. Back with Kyle, he'll crash Diane and Jack's lunch to admit he told Claire about kissing Audra in Nice. Kyle will explain Claire's awful reaction and will be determined to repair the damage. Even though Diane will beg Kyle to give Claire some time, Kyle will believe that he needs to make a big gesture right away. When Jack and Diane wonder about Kyle's plans, he'll declare that he's going to ask Claire to marry him. Kyle Abbott had always considered himself clever when it came to handling crises, but lately, every decision he made seemed to backfire, leaving him backed into a corner with the people he loved most. The latest disaster had been triggered by Audra Charles, whose manipulative ways had a way of worming into any situation and twisting it to her advantage. What started as a tense confrontation had turned into a full-blown blow-up, one that left Kyle scrambling to repair his relationship with Claire Newman, the woman he insisted he loved more than anything. The walls of Society seemed to echo with the tension when Jack Abbott, ever the protective father and seasoned rival of Victor Newman, confronted the mustache himself in a heated showdown over Kyle's future. Jack demanded that Victor tear up the $5 million contract Kyle had signed, insisting that if Victor truly meant what he claimed, that he wasn't standing in the way of Kyle and Claire's romance, then he'd have no reason to hang that contract over Kyle's head. Victor, with his usual smugness and authority, flatly refused to destroy what he called a perfectly good deal, reminding Jack that in business, a contract was ironclad, and tearing it up wasn't in his nature. This refusal sparked one of their typical confrontations, the kind that was as much about decades of personal animosity as it was about the actual issue at hand, and Jack walked away fuming but not defeated, already plotting his next move to deliver Victor a taste of his own medicine. Diane Abbott, ever the voice of caution in Jack's ear, learned of his plan afterward and worried he might only make things worse by pushing back too hard against Victor. especially at a time when the Abbotts were already vulnerable thanks to Kyle's messy entanglement with Audra. She tried to steer Jack toward patience, but Jack's pride and his loyalty to his family were too strong to simply let Victor trample over them yet again. Kane Ashby's name came up briefly in the conversation, with Diane wondering if Kane could complicate things further, but Jack brushed it off, certain that Kane wasn't a priority compared to Victor. Unbeknownst to them, however, Victor was already setting other wheels in motion, sending a text to Kane outside society to check if he was ready to move forward with their covert alliance against Jabbo, a message that hinted at more storm clouds brewing on the horizon. Meanwhile, across town at the coffee house, Victoria Newman sat with her mother Nikki, reflecting on her life after Cole Howard and her lingering grief over what could have been. Victoria confided in Nikki about her worries for Claire, knowing her daughter still carried the heavy burden of grief after everything she had endured under Jordan's manipulative grip. Nikki, ever the matriarch, offered her perspective and revealed a plan she believed might give Claire purpose again. A promotion within Newman Enterprises as a junior executive in a carefully chosen division, something Nikki framed as the next rung on the corporate ladder. She reasoned that giving Claire a tangible future to build on might help her process her emotions, though she was careful not to push too hard. As Nikki and Victoria debated the merits of this plan, Claire herself was having a far different kind of conversation with Kyle at the Abbott mansion. Sitting together in a room that carried the weight of family history, Claire decided it was time for honesty and pressed Kyle to come clean about what he had been keeping from her. She revealed that she had confronted Nate Hastings about Audra's actions right in front of Audra, who naturally denied everything with her usual smoothness. But that wasn't what troubled Claire most. It was the nagging suspicion that Kyle still wasn't being fully transparent about what happened during their time in Nice. Her eyes locked on him with the kind of intensity that made evasion impossible, and despite his initial hesitation, Kyle couldn't ignore the echoes of his parents' advice urging him to be honest. Finally, he confessed that while in France, he had allowed Audra to kiss him. Though he tried to downplay it, insisting he was disgusted the entire time and only went along briefly to sell the trap they had set, the damage was already done. Claire's expression shifted from disbelief to betrayal as she realized that Kyle had lied to her before, claiming that nothing happened. Her anger flared as she pointed out that, ironically, Audra had been more truthful with her than Kyle had, at least by omission. She wondered aloud if he ever would have admitted the truth without her forcing the issue, a question that cut Kyle to the core. Desperate, he begged her to reassure him that he hadn't made things irreparably worse, but Claire, her heart raw and her trust shaken, couldn't give him that comfort. She left him to wrestle with his guilt and confusion, choosing instead to join Victoria and Nikki at the coffee house, where she opened up about Kyle's confession. Claire admitted that Kyle had kissed Audra in Nice and described how it made her feel, dredging up old wounds about being lied to, manipulated, and raised in deceit by Jordan. Nikki, ever the peacemaker, tried to soothe Claire by acknowledging Kyle's mistake but also emphasizing his genuine love for her, while Victoria listened more cautiously, knowing her daughter's heart was fragile. Claire, however, wasn't ready to forgive or forget. She needed time to process the betrayal, no matter how small Kyle tried to make it seem. Later, Nikki confronted Victor at the ranch, questioning why he was treating Kyle the way he was, only to have Victor brush it off as another chapter in his endless rivalry with Jack, admitting that their feud was more personal than business at this point. Back at society, Kyle, restless and guilt-ridden, interrupted Diane and Jack's lunch to confess that he had finally told Claire the truth and that her reaction had been devastating. He admitted she had stormed off, hurt and angry, leaving him feeling powerless. Diane counseled patience, urging him to give Claire the space she needed to cool off and reflect, but Kyle's desperation was stronger than his reason. He believed that waiting would only allow the rift to deepen, and he insisted that a grand gesture was the only way to show Claire how much she meant to him. When pressed by his parents to explain, Kyle shocked them both by declaring that he planned to propose marriage to Claire, convinced that asking her to marry him was the one move bold enough to repair the damage and prove his commitment. Diane gasped at the abruptness of it all, warning that a proposal born from desperation could backfire, but Jack, though wary, recognized the Abbott spirit in his son's determination. Kyle's eyes shone with resolve as he explained that this wasn't just about fixing a mistake, it was about securing a future with the woman he loved before outside forces like Audra or even Victor had a chance to destroy it completely. He knew Claire might not be ready to hear the words, but in his heart, Kyle felt certain that only by laying it all on the line could he ever hope to regain her trust, even if it meant risking rejection. Kyle's declaration that he intended to propose to Claire left both Jack and Diane stunned, not because they doubted his love for her, but because the timing felt reckless, almost as if he was attempting to force a fairy tale ending onto a story still caught in the storm. Jack leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and reminded Kyle that marriage wasn't a band-aid to cover up betrayal, that a proposal wasn't something to wield like a shield against the hurt he had caused. Diane, more emotional, begged him to slow down, urging him to consider whether Claire was in any state to accept such a question when her trust in him was shaken. But Kyle, driven by an almost frantic need to prove his devotion, shook his head, insisting that Claire needed to see just how serious he was, that she had to understand this wasn't just about salvaging appearances, it was about his heart, his future, their future together. Jack reminded him that Victor Newman would pounce on any sign of weakness and warned that a botched proposal could give Victor more ammunition in the war between Newman and Abbott, but Kyle wouldn't be swayed, declaring that he would rather risk rejection than let Claire slip away. While his parents exchanged worried glances, Kyle stormed out, already crafting plans in his head, picturing a grand romantic gesture that would cut through Claire's pain and remind her that no matter what happened in Nice, he was hers and only hers. At the coffee house, Claire sat at a table with Victoria and Nikki, her mind spinning in circles as she replayed Kyle's confession again and again, each iteration hitting her differently. Sometimes she felt devastated, other times furious, and then occasionally she softened, wondering if maybe he truly was caught in an impossible position with Audra. Victoria, protective and maternal, urged caution, reminding her daughter that forgiveness couldn't be rushed and that love needed trust to survive, while Nikki, softer in her approach, emphasized Kyle's long history of fighting for what he believed in, suggesting that Claire consider whether his desperation might be proof of how deeply he loved her. Claire sighed, confessing that she wasn't sure what to believe anymore, that her childhood under Jordan had left her with instincts that screamed at her to run when deception entered the picture, but her heart tugged in the opposite direction, refusing to let go of Kyle so easily. Nikki squeezed her hand, hinting that sometimes love wasn't about perfection but about persistence, about finding someone who was willing to face the ugliness and still choose you. As Claire mulled over her family's advice, Kyle was setting his plan into motion, calling society to reserve the rooftop terrace, instructing the staff to prepare a romantic dinner with candles and roses, even arranging for a string quartet to play softly in the background. His vision was clear. He would create a setting so undeniably romantic, so unmistakably about the future, that Claire would feel the sincerity behind every detail. Meanwhile, Victor Newman sat at the ranch with his phone in hand, smirking as he read Kane's confirmation text that their alliance against Jabbo was ready to advance. Nikki entered the room just in time to catch Victor's satisfied expression and pressed him again about why he was so intent on meddling in Kyle's life, reiterating her belief that his beef with Jack was the true motivator. Victor shrugged, dismissing her accusations with a classic Newman smirk, though privately he knew she was right. This was less about Kyle and Claire and more about beating Jack Abbott at yet another round of their lifelong chess match. At Jabbo, Jack paced in his office, worrying that his son's impulsive decision to propose might make things worse, while Diane hovered nearby, fretting aloud that Kyle was setting himself up for disaster. She wished she could call Claire and prepare her, but she knew meddling might only backfire. Back at the Abbott mansion, Kyle tried on his suit, rehearsing lines in front of the mirror, practicing how he'd explain that the kiss with Audra meant nothing, how he'd frame the proposal not as a way to cover the past but as a way to promise a future. His nerves buzzed like live wires, but his determination never wavered. Tonight, he was going to show Claire just how serious he was. When evening fell, Claire arrived at society at Kyle's request, unsure what to expect. She walked slowly, her heart conflicted, still carrying the hurt of his dishonesty but curious about what he wanted to say. As the elevator doors opened to the rooftop terrace, she gasped at the sight. The city lights twinkled in the distance, candles flickered on every table, and a soft melody floated in the air. Kyle stood at the center of it all, a bouquet of white roses in hand, his eyes locked on hers with a mixture of hope and fear. Claire hesitated at the threshold, overwhelmed by the grandness of the gesture, and her first instinct was suspicion. Was this an attempt to manipulate her emotions? But when Kyle stepped forward, setting the roses aside, and dropped to one knee, the rawness in his eyes told her this wasn't about manipulation. He spoke quickly but with passion, telling her how much she meant to him, how losing her was his greatest fear, how he knew he had made mistakes but was determined to spend the rest of his life proving that she was his only love. He admitted that honesty hadn't always been his strength, that he had stumbled under the weight of trying to protect her from the ugliness of what happened in Nice, but he promised that moving forward, he would never again let fear dictate his choices. Claire's eyes brimmed with tears as he opened the ring box, revealing a sparkling diamond that caught the candlelight. The silence stretched between them, thick and charged, as she wrestled with her emotions. Part of her longed to say yes, to leap into the future he painted so vividly, while another part whispered that forgiveness couldn't be won in a single night. She finally spoke, her voice trembling, admitting that the proposal was beautiful, that she could feel the truth in his words, but that trust couldn't be rebuilt in an instant. Kyle's face fell, though he tried to hide it, as she explained that she wasn't ready to give him an answer yet. The music continued to play, and for a long moment, they simply stared at each other, caught in the limbo between love and doubt. Kyle stood, taking her hands gently, and assured her that no matter how long it took, he would wait, he would fight, he would do whatever it took to earn back her trust. Claire squeezed his hand in return, whispering that she believed him but still needed time. Downstairs, Diane and Jack arrived quietly, having been tipped off about Kyle's plan, and when they saw the aftermath, Kyle standing with Claire's hands in his, no answer given, they exchanged a look that was part relief, part worry. Diane whispered that at least Claire hadn't said no, while Jack muttered that patience would now be the true test. As the night wore on, Kyle walked Claire out, promising he wouldn't pressure her and leaving her with the knowledge that his love was real, even if imperfect. Across town, Victor received word from Kane that their alliance was advancing smoothly, and he smirked at the thought that while Kyle played at romance, the bigger game was still unfolding in the shadows. At the coffeehouse later, Claire confided in Nikki once more, telling her about the proposal and her hesitation, and Nikki smiled knowingly, assuring her that Kyle's willingness to wait might be the truest sign of love yet. Claire nodded, still conflicted but comforted by the thought that perhaps, just perhaps, Kyle's bold move was the first step toward healing what Audra's chaos had nearly destroyed. Kyle spent the rest of that night in a haze of restless hope and gnawing uncertainty, torn between the sweetness of having laid his heart bare and the bitterness of not having received an answer. When he returned to the Abbott mansion, Jack and Diane were waiting in the living room, their faces etched with the complicated blend of pride, concern, and weariness that only parents could master. Diane immediately rushed to hug her son, whispering that she was proud of him for being brave, even if she wished he had waited for the right moment. Jack, however, was blunt, reminding Kyle that Claire's silence was not the maybe he was hoping for but rather a not yet that needed to be respected. Kyle defended himself, insisting that Claire had to see how serious he was, and that even though she hadn't said yes, she hadn't walked away either. Jack sighed, conceding that his son had made a bold move, but warned that boldness had consequences, especially with Victor Newman circling like a shark in bloody waters. Diane squeezed Kyle's arm, urging him to focus on patience and consistent honesty moving forward, but Kyle, restless as ever, declared that waiting wasn't in his DNA. He needed to act, to prove every day that he was worthy of Claire's love. Upstairs in her room at the Newman Ranch, Claire sat awake long into the night, staring at the ring box Kyle had left with her. She hadn't been ready to slip it on her finger, but she couldn't bring herself to return it either. The diamond sparkled under the lamp, a constant reminder of the choice she hadn't made. Her mind replayed Nikki's earlier words about persistence, Jack's warnings about Abbott recklessness, and her own fears of falling into a trap of lies like the ones Jordan had ensnared her in for years. The thought of marriage terrified her, not because of Kyle, but because of what it symbolized: forever, trust, and vulnerability, three things she wasn't sure she was strong enough to commit to yet. Still, in her heart, she knew Kyle loved her deeply, and that made her hesitation ache even more. Meanwhile, across town at the Newman Ranch, Victor leaned back in his leather chair, savoring a glass of brandy while texting Kane about the next step in their alliance. Kane's response was curt but confident. He was ready to move forward, ready to destabilize Jabbo in ways Jack Abbott wouldn't see coming. Victor smirked, already envisioning Jack's face when the trap closed in around him.